Welcome back to FAMWISE, lesson number 6, charting the phases of your cycle. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the different phases of your cycle and how to determine them and how to chart them. So in general, there are 4 main phases of your cycle. We have the menstrual phase, the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, and your luteal phase. Now, the menstrual phase is from day 1 of your period until the end of that period. The follicular phase is also day 1, so the day 1 of your period, and that goes all the way until ovulation. The ovulatory phase is the 5 days prior to ovulation and ovulation itself. In our teachings, it's also peak plus 3. And then the luteal phase starts the day after ovulation, so in our case, the day after peak day, and then goes until the end of your cycle, so the day of the next period. So when we discuss phases, we can also put it into like 2 main phases or the 2 halves of a cycle, which is the follicular phase and the luteal phase. When we are charting, we can also put the cycle divided into 3 phases for easier charting purposes. So this would be the pre-ovulatory phase, the ovulatory phase, and the post-ovulatory phase. So you can see on the chart on the right how we have the first half of the cycle before ovulation, so that's before that hump. That's the follicular phase, and that is governed by the growing follicle. And then our luteal phase occurs after ovulation, which is governed by the corpus luteum, which is making progesterone. Now remember that ovulation is the main event of your cycle, so ovulation separates the main phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. And when we chart, we're charting the POC and peak day, which can also help us determine these 3 charting phases. So the pre-ovulatory, the ovulatory, and the post-ovulatory. The 2 main phases, follicular and luteal, you can see that on the chart down below. So we have the follicular going all the way up until peak day, and then we have our luteal phase, which happens after peak day. So if you're looking to count how many days are in each, the follicular phase will be from day 1 up until peak day. And then the luteal phase would be the day after peak day until the next period. So for this cycle, the luteal phase would be 14 days in length. And in this chart, you can see the 3 charting phases are pre-ovulatory from day 1 until our POC, the ovulatory phase from our POC until peak plus 3, and then our post-ovulatory phase is the day after peak plus 3, so that 4th day there until the end of the cycle. Pre-ovulatory phase begins day 1 of your period and ends with the point of change or your POC to EL or ES mucus. So this phase is very variable in length, and it depends on when the brain releases FSH to stimulate the egg, causing that increase in estrogen, and if it progresses towards ovulation. So this includes menstruation and then possible G mucus. Because remember, you could go straight from menstruation into your POC. So then the pre-ovulatory phase would just be menstruation. So this is really going to differ. And here you can see the ovulatory phase on the chart below. This is the main event of the cycle, and it's the maturation and release of this mature egg. So this is your fertile window or your ovulatory phase. Fertile window includes ovulation, but it also includes the days prior to ovulation where we're seeing that mucus, and then also 3 days after our peak day, just in case the egg gets released a little bit later. And then we also have time for that egg to like disintegrate because it only lasts up to 24 hours, right? So the beginning of the onset of EL or ES mucus, aka our POC, our point of change, is going to be the opening of this fertile window and the opening of our ovulatory phase. And the ovulatory phase is going to span until peak plus 3. The post-ovulatory phase is going to begin on the 4th day after peak day, so the day after peak plus 3. So dryness after ovulation reflects a rise in progesterone from the corpus luteum as that thick G mucus seals the cervix against sperm and bacteria. Now, this phase is fairly stable in length. Usually, a luteal phase is between 12 and 14 days. We want it to be above 10, and it doesn't really go past 16. Going back to cover the 2 halves again, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. This is the follicular phase on the chart below. So this is from day 1 of your cycle again until ovulation. This is dominated by the follicle growth and maturation, and this phase is variable in length. So if you have a really long cycle, that is going to be due to the follicular phase not the luteal phase. And the luteal phase begins after ovulation and ends on the last day of the cycle. So this is dominated by the activity of the corpus luteum, and a healthy luteal phase reflects that ovulation has occurred and the corpus luteum is formed. The luteal phase, like we mentioned earlier, is really set in length, so it doesn't really change cycle to cycle. And a length between 9 to 18 days for the FEM rules, so that's for charting purposes, reflects a sufficient hormone level that supports pregnancy and overall health. So the real life average for luteal phase, like we said, is 12 to 14 days, and we want at least 10 days, and it won't go over 16 days. So your luteal phase doesn't really differ much. Once in a while, you could have a shorter luteal phase if there's like a particular stress or something like that, but generally it's pretty consistent. The reason why we want a long enough luteal phase and we don't want it to be less than 10 days, likely that leads to lower progesterone levels, trouble getting pregnant with fertility, and even a possible miscarriage. So when I ask you for your cycle length, a lot of people get this confused with cycle meaning menstruation and just your period, but your cycle length is actually the full cycle. So your cycle length is day 1 of your full bleed until your next true period. So example would be like 28-day cycle or 32-day cycle. So the cycle length is determined by the levels of FSH and LH acting on the ovaries to produce estrogen and progesterone. So the pre-ovulatory phase can be shorter or longer, and this depends on when FSH launches, that follicle development, and when ovulation occurs. So sufficient progesterone is needed to support the luteal phase length and maintain the uterine lining to support a pregnancy. A regular cycle is between 24 and 36 days, and this represents that FSH, so that hormone from your brain, is rising to the threshold and that follicle is beginning its rapid growth. A short cycle will be less than 24 days, and this can suggest that FSH rises early and the follicle develops early, or you have a really short luteal phase. So either the beginning of the cycle is affected or the end of the cycle is affected during that luteal phase. A long cycle is longer than 36 days, and this suggests that FSH rises and the follicle development is delayed for some reason, or there's low hormone levels and FSH is not rising. Going a little bit deeper into cycle length, some things that we can see with shorter cycles, less than 24 days, are anovulatory cycles, so you're not ovulating in that cycle. We could see poor corpus luteum formation, poor egg quality, a short luteal phase, less than 10 days, low progesterone levels, a scanty light period. Possibly this could be due to stress, illness, travel, or medications, exercise changes, diet changes, and weight changes. You could be in perimenopause, you could be postpartum, or just like the start of puberty. Long cycles, longer than 36 days, we could see poor egg quality again, high estrogen exposure long term, low hormone levels, hypothalamic amenorrhea, meaning you're going a long time without seeing a period. You could have PCOS. This could be due to stress, illness, travel, medication, again with the exercise, diet, and weight changes. Perhaps you have a sensitivity, celiac disease, or a gluten or dairy sensitivity. You could have a thyroid irregularity, perimenopause, postpartum, or puberty. So in this lesson, I've attached some practice questions and their answer keys to help support the material. If you have any questions on this homework, you can pop it into the community and I'll help you through it. But other than that, that was the lesson all about the phases of the cycle. Later on, we're going to go deeper into like cycle syncing and different things that you can do for your health. And in the next lesson, we're going to be covering basal body temperature and how to track your temperature to confirm ovulation has occurred.